For entrepreneurs, the heavy weight of expectation across all quarters of society is persistent. From investors to employees to customers, even all the way to community and family, they are constantly expected to have the answers. Experts have observed that entrepreneurs are faced with stress, anxiety, and burnout on an almost daily basis. It takes an incredible amount of resolve and willpower against daunting odds to succeed as a self-starter, leaving them vulnerable to several mental health challenges. It's no surprise then that a UC Berkeley study showed that 72% of entrepreneurs were found to have some kind of mental health concern. So today, we'll explore how entrepreneurs manage their mental health, especially in the current socio-economic climate we face in South Africa. Welcome to the Reimagine Mental Health series on Investec Focus Radio SA, brought to you by Investec Life. I'm Katie Katapodis. In this episode of the podcast series, we'll discuss ways in which self-employed individuals, also known as entrepreneurs, manage their mental health. Joining me for today's discussion is Darren Berendt, CEO Investec Life, Dr. Lethabo Machaba-Simelane, founder of the Business Side of Medicine Initiative, and the Dr. L. Machaba Foundation, also pediatric specialist at Netcare Sunninghill, and Zakeni Gobo, founder and CEO of Kelo Digital Bookstore and founder of Siafunda Digital Libraries. Good afternoon and welcome to all of you.
Hi.
Thank you. Thanks.
Darren, I want to start with you. Why was it important, not just for you as an individual, but as the CEO of Investec Life, to focus on mental wellness in a way that you have and to actually take the lead in corporate South Africa like this?
So firstly, this is not purely my initiative. So this is very much a team initiative. This is something we identified a couple of years ago in a few different ways. As a life insurer, we obviously privy to a lot of personal information about our clients in terms of where they are from a health perspective. And we started, seeing some, really concerning trends around mental health coming through in terms of how we were engaging with our clients, in terms of how we wanted to provide various services and products to them. And I think this is something that we felt is not firstly being spoken about. So I think there is a stigma element. So this podcast series is part of some of our initiatives to try in our small way to bring an element of an awareness and start a conversation. And especially in ways that it hasn't traditionally been spoken about. I think the other piece is that the industry that we operate in is, for lack of a better word, outdated in how we think about mental health, how we deal with it, the products and services we can offer to our clients. And so we're trying to be very proactive in terms of moving the needle with some of our service providers, both locally and internationally. So that's something I think that we are starting to make some traction with. We're very excited about. And then the last piece is, there are, and we're talking about entrepreneurs today, there are a lot of, social entrepreneurs trying to make a difference in this space who see that the issue is growing. It's becoming more prevalent. I think people are becoming more aware. So a big part is the awareness piece. A lot of people have battled with mental health, concerns for many years, but it hasn't been something that you're necessarily able to identify or that you look to address. It's something that you ignored and you were tough and you moved on. So I think there's a lot of social entrepreneurs in this space. And so we're also thinking quite carefully around how do we, empower those entrepreneurs.
So our podcast series has focused so much, as we know, on mental wellness, reimagining mental health as we know. But we've also looked at various sectors. We've looked at young professionals. We've looked at how data and social media affects our mental wellness. This is the first time we're looking at entrepreneurs. Let me start with you, Doc, and say, as an entrepreneur, do you think it's even more difficult or do you think it's easier to cope with some of the many challenges? Some may argue you are the master of your own fate and can manage things as you want. Others may have a totally different view.
I feel that post-COVID, as Darren has said, it has become more challenging as an entrepreneur in South Africa. The reason that being is that post-COVID, we know that our socio-economic status in South Africa has changed. I feel that if government, private sectors, doctors, non-doctors, social entrepreneurs, and corporates come together, we can actually problem solve this and create this huge mountain to become not as big as it looks. The statistics actually say, Darren, you won't believe that 2.5 psychologists and psychiatrists per 100,000 patients. So the collaborative effort that is required now is highly, highly appreciated. So yes, the issues have come up as an entrepreneur personally myself in terms of burnout and stress, anxiety, all of that. was quite significant for me, especially during COVID. Not only were we having to deal with now the patient who's lying in the bed, actually struggling to breathe, but now we're dealing with the trauma of patients having now to cry and actually see their loved ones going through all of that.
So, Kenny, let me come to you. We've heard the term social entrepreneur being used by both Darren and Letabo here. You are a self-described social entrepreneur. What does that mean exactly? And how different is that to what one may term a normal entrepreneur?
So I would say it's mostly about someone who's trying to create a balance between creating something sustainable and profitable, but at the same time being driven by something bigger than just making a profit. And so it's really about identifying issues. And a lot of the time you actually find that a lot of social entrepreneurs create something out of experience.
And out of crisis, I imagine.
Exactly. So from the very beginning, it's a very personal journey. It's something that's attached to their emotions. And then it's really about just creating solutions. And from those solutions, then a business starts to form and then it grows from there.
Tell us about your journey and the solution that you were able to come up with.
So I've been in 3 startups. So I would say this is my 3rd company. I started my very first one at university called Campus.com. I was actually about to be financially excluded and I needed money. And I used to do a lot of work for Student Village and doing promotions on campus. And so obviously, that was very limiting. And so that's when the idea came up to create something much broader that basically enables students to get jobs on campus, write articles, and just be able to have a community where they can be able to share their experiences. And then the second one, I guess, after leaving university was Siyafunda, which again was born out of my own experience in high school. So I went into a school in Umlazi that didn't have a math teacher. So after completing matric with 4 distinctions, I failed maths. So I had to essentially go to a finishing school and upgrade my maths results to then get into UCT. So I think with everything that I've done, there's a huge element that has had to do with my very own personal experience or something very close to me that has led to the identification and actually experiencing the crisis and then saying, maybe there's a better way that can be done, or envisioning something better that can come out of it, and then just being able to create that. And now I'm running the CEO of Kelo, which is essentially, again, in the same space, which is really just about empowering people in terms of lowering the barriers to access to textbooks, where people can rent books instead of buying them at much reduced cost, but also be able to just access books on their mobile from anywhere.
I love that. I love it because it's inspirational. It's encouraging. I love that you started in high school. I love that you continued at varsity. Was it all plain sailing, or did you have these incredible moments of stress and distress that ultimately ended up affecting your mental wellness?
Oh, I definitely had a lot of those. So I can actually pinpoint a lot of different moments where everything fell apart and you struggle to sort of keep it together. I would say, I think part of being an entrepreneur is that every aspect of your life really gets stretched to the absolute limit. You get challenged from everywhere, from the people you work with to the family, the relationships that you hold financially. And so at every turn, you are basically pushing against the wind. And so it becomes very hard because during that whole process, you are honestly just winging it. But everyone expects you to have it all together. Everybody expects you to know what you're doing, because any side of vulnerability, you either lose credibility or you lose clients. So you always have to basically fake it while you make it.
Smile and wave.
And smile, exactly. Just smile and wave. And so obviously that can, it does take a toll on you because you're constantly breaking yourself. But I think also there's an element, being a social entrepreneur, you're surrounded by so much trauma and so much heartbreak already that somehow with whatever it is that you're going through, you always feel like you're a little bit better off. So somehow you're supposed to take it. And so you never really give yourself space and time to heal yourself and give yourself, the resources to be able to rebuild. And so it is this process of continuously building, and then eventually either you crash, or if you don't take breaks in between, it becomes very hard to sustain yourself. And that's why I think we're seeing a lot of entrepreneurs, either just quit completely or give up or just blow up in an interview or social media. It's because there's just so much that you're carrying at all point in time.
It's like a pressure cooker.
Exactly. Yes, eventually it just blows up.
Dr. Letabo, you're agreeing with this, and you're nodding, and do you have that experience as well?
Yeah, so in my industry, there is this God complex that we talk about. Where
doctors never.
Yeah. So you know what? Actually, studies have shown, like in the UK, they actually did a study on doctors from January 2008 to 2017. And in that study, they were just profiling doctors in terms of being entrepreneurs and always having to have the last answer. And I can say that, to be honest with you, the pressure of that, first of all, when they choose us, the God complex comes from the fact that we are supposed to be the type A personalities. Type A personalities are perfectionist, very obsessive, and we have this martyrdom thing going on. So we would rather die before we let somebody else die. So I feel that in my space, when it comes to entrepreneurship, that's where a lot of the issues come up, the mental health issues. We are always the tow trucks. So nobody ever expects the tow truck to crumble. Who actually tows a tow truck? So that's what we've seen, the mental issues that I've had, and have had to support a lot of the doctors, especially in my platform called the Business Side of Medicine. I actually started it, as you're saying, Sakeni, from just actually seeing doctors crumbling, and at least like a lot of practices having to fall apart. You know, like they say, in the first 5 years, more than 40% of practices don't make it. So as an entrepreneur, you always have to have an answer. But then now when you've got a God complex, who's going to help you? And then when do you admit that you've got burnout, you've got stress, you've got anxiety, and now you're shouting at your clients, which are meant to be patients? I really feel that just, first of all, having that insight and tapping into the networks that are there when you need help and actually problem solving and just sitting down and saying, you know what, I'm not coping.
But Darren, there's an interconnectedness, I think, between succeeding and support. Do you think that South Africa offers enough support to entrepreneurs in our country, particularly young entrepreneurs?
So I built businesses within Investec. It's very different to being an entrepreneur when you're out by yourself. There's an element of personal responsibility that comes through that I think is really at the core of being an entrepreneur, whether it's a small business and you now have primary responsibility for the livelihood of the people around you, or, you know, whether it's necessarily your patients. But there is an element of, if I drop the ball, there's real serious repercussions and nobody else is there to pick it up. There is no support network necessarily behind you. So that is a big part of being an entrepreneur. You asked about, is enough being done? I think, you know, South Africa, in terms of our entrepreneurial ecosystem, is in its infancy. You know, it's not the same as, you know, developed countries, where you know, as Investec, we get a lot of exposure to developed countries, you know, are just further on in their journey in terms of supporting entrepreneurs, whether it's necessarily with the various types of resources they need to have access to. You know, many entrepreneurs start out and you're now running a small business. You know, you don't know how to manage your accounts. You don't necessarily know how to, you know, register your company. You don't necessarily know how to, you know, put contracts in place with service provider, whatever it may be. There's, you know, invariably there's a whole lot of other stuff that often it's quite hard to get access to resources to.
I wish tertiary institutions would listen up, though. I wish schools would listen up, because I think it starts there.
No, definitely it is. And I think the environment is actually very hostile for entrepreneurs. I remember when I started at varsity, the institution that I was in is actually ended up being the one that basically kicked us out. So there was literally no support to begin with, but there was just a lot of sort of territorial thinking. And obviously you're young, you're a student. There's a lot of gatekeeping that happens that basically doesn't give you space to be able to build on what you're doing. And for some reason, the powers that be, as I call them, you know, the people that are supposed to be actually providing you the support and instruments actually end up being the gatekeepers that push you further out. And so, as I said, you're constantly fighting against the current. There's something about our perception that needs to change.
And of course, that's an added pressure. That's an added stress and anxiety when you talk about a hostile environment.
Yeah, definitely. It's very difficult to navigate those spaces, because you never know where the bombs are, whether it's sort of like you're walking in a minefield. You know, I remember I was asked the question, like, what is the one thing you misunderstood or assumed about entrepreneurship that you found to be true? And I realized that it's not necessarily about the idea or the product or the concept. A lot of it is navigating politics, navigating people, navigating structures, gatekeepers, and all of that. So it's really a people's game rather than an actual product or a business aspect. And to be honest, when you're starting out as a young entrepreneur, you are not equipped to understand that, okay, this is how corporate works and this is how these structures work. And so a lot of the time you're going in ill-equipped and you're sort of trying to pick things up and learn along the way, but there is very little support. And one mistake, you're either blacklisted or you're pushed out. So it becomes this thing where you just constantly sort of working on minefield. You don't actually know when the next bomb is going to go off. And also when that goes off, it's like, okay, how do I survive it? how do I manage all these different stakeholders that I'm working with and try and create relationships in an environment that I really don't understand, that I'm learning as I go.
So, Zakini, you're very clear. The hurdles and the minefields are definitely there. But Darren, how important is entrepreneurship for a country like South Africa? Because I don't want to only paint a picture of doom and gloom around entrepreneurship and becoming an entrepreneur.
So I think a very positive thing is I think that the entrepreneurial spirit is definitely very strong in South Africa, which it has to be. I mean, considering our unemployment rates, it's a matter of livelihoods. And that extends everything from, people operating in the informal sector to, people starting very traditional small businesses to, some of the cutting edge stuff that's happening in South Africa. I think the capacity in terms of entrepreneurship is there. I think where the support needs to come in is how do you take someone who's got a good idea, who starts out in a very much a self-employed environment. It's a business of one. And what do we need to do to help those people to scale that into small businesses and then invariably into established businesses? I saw some interesting research the other day that spoke about that transition, some numbers around that transition and how that has in actual fact improved in the last 2-3 years. So we obviously went through COVID where there was a lot of small businesses that were forced to close. And since then, the transition from, small businesses to becoming established businesses, and established business in the definition there was, in existence for longer than 3 years.
Is that definition still accurate? If you're in existence for longer than 3 years, you're an established business.
I think that in a place like South Africa where we don't have a substantial amount of resources that people can rely on, if you can keep going for 3 years, I think that's a positive. I mean, I would agree with that. That's my personal view. So developed. We're not in a place where, based upon an interesting business idea, you can speak to a few people and you can be given, a check that can be, keep you going for the next 3, 4, 5 years. In South Africa, people have to hustle. We're hearing that it's a consistent message.
I wish there was a camera in the studio because, as you said, people have to hustle. So I got these two nodding heads next to me between Zakini and Letabo.
So if you can make it to 2, 3, 4, 5 years, if you can go from a business of one to a business of 3, 4, 5, I mean, that's what South Africa needs. In successful countries around the world, often your biggest employer is effectively small business. And that's the problem we need to solve. I mean, we've got a big issue around unemployment in South Africa, and we've got a lot of capable, enthusiastic, keen people that in often cases, don't know where to start, or when they knock on the doors that they think they should be knocking on, nobody answers or they close to them. So, I've experienced that a lot in South Africa in terms of often it's just getting your idea in front of the right person. And that is so hard. And that's tough. I think it's tough for entrepreneurs where success is not just purely driven on hard work and diligence and so on. It actually is, there is an element of luck involved.
And the socio-economic, political environment of our country.
Most definitely. So you asked what's the positive message? We've got a lot of entrepreneurs. We've got people that are keen, that have got energy, that have got drive. It's a matter of finding them, identifying them and providing the right support.
And we keep hearing how resilient we are as a country and a people. So hopefully that resilience will come in.
I don't know if you guys saw the articles trending on News 24 and everywhere else, where for the first time in our country, we've got more than 500 doctors that are unemployed. So for me, Darren, I had to teach doctors the hustle to say, no, now you're an entrepreneur. You are going to go start your business. You need an accountant. You need a front desk. You need registrations. These are the people. You need a lawyer. So just all those basic things to put it together. You're going to be creative with your business model, whatever it is that you have. And that even us as entrepreneurs, we are visionaries. We see the complete picture before it actually happens. And then the problem is now getting stakeholders to buy into that vision. Because now how do you get investment? How do you get funding, And I find that with us, the entrepreneurs is, especially the mompreneurs, when the company goes into a valley of death, instead of adapting, re-strategizing, rebranding, people then now stay there and then they give up. And I feel that's so sad for me to watch. Because now most companies go into that valley of death.
At some point in their journey.
Yeah. So what we do is we give them coping mechanisms and also networking and support facilities to say, let's get the experts in, let's get these people in. This is the company. If you need electronics, ultrasounds, this is what you're going to get. This is what we can help you with. Let's get a brand and marketing. Like even me, I keep on saying on my platform, I had to go on social media in my late 30s. And just to put it in as a joke, my husband was like, I don't want a slay queen in the house. I'm like, no. I'm not going to be wearing nails and doing all those things. all I want to do is educate. And by creating an education platform just for my business, I can tell you I lack nothing for clients. Like clients are coming in, they're getting empowered, less mental issues, also creating networks within the practice.
So, Kenny, we know in the South African context, employing 2 people doesn't mean feeding 2 people. Employing 4 people doesn't mean feeding 4 people. You can times that by 4, 5, 6 each.
Yep.
And the pressure, I imagine, as an entrepreneur is even greater, knowing that the 5 people who sit in front of me, I'm actually responsible for 50 mouths, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. So, yeah, you bring in someone into your vision. It's not just them that you're accountable to. It's their children, their parents, also their own dreams. And so there's a lot that sits on you being able to, one, make sure that you drive the ship to where everybody wins at the end of the day. Because ultimately, I think that's what we're always trying to create. The win-win scenarios where the people that we're with, we move along with them. We
grow together.
We grow together. If they don't win, we don't win. And so the focus of making sure that even though with the little resources that you have, you are empowering not only the people that you're working with, but the community that you're impacting, is central to everything that you're doing. And I think, as I said earlier, that comes with a lot of responsibility. And because also you are not removed, you are there in the front, talking to the principal, talking to the person who's actually impacted by the issue that needs to be solved. And so there's a lot that you take in and that you bring in terms of just taking on that responsibility and making sure that I have to make this work, because there's just so much that is dependent on what we're building and what we're doing.
Letaba, was there ever a moment in your career, in your entrepreneurial journey specifically, where you thought enough is enough and I want to throw in the towel now? I actually don't know if I've got this in me.
I remember the exact year, date, and time. And that was in 2017, when I actually left my government post. In government, we are called so-called consultants. So we really are like demigods, if I can put it that way. So coming into business, I started off with a brand that I felt I shouldn't have aligned myself with. So it was a small hospital, not really well known. And when I started off, it was very difficult to generate a clientele. So then for me, I decided that since I wasn't sure what I was doing, I then almost gave up, because the numbers that I expected, I thought I'd be seeing like 1,000 patients within a certain number of time. So then what I then did was then move to Netcare and worked in a group practice. And I actually found 3 lovely women who have been entrepreneurs for more than 15 years. So just being able to download all of that skill and education and experience, I felt that was the game changer for me. And henceforth, I got a mentor. And I feel that the stress that I had, the burnout that I had, and also because, as Kenny is saying, it's the numbers. My husband kept on saying to me, the numbers are not right. We need to pay this and this off. And for me, I think it was the finances that almost made me give up. And then actually just downloading all that experience, learning the know-how to, and then being awarded a solo practice in Netcare and then running my own business. I felt that experience I was able to take on and then soar. So there was that moment. But I feel that the solution to that on a positive note is always then get mentorship. Go get the skill that you need to learn, work with those that have done it for a long time, and acquire that skill and then take it and run with it.
It was something that sort of really resonated with me there. So, I mean, I've been lucky enough that I've had exposure to entrepreneurship, locally, internationally, and also I've been lucky enough to be exposed to a lot of entrepreneurs where I wasn't necessarily an entrepreneur. So I was either an investor or an advisor, or got in the trenches for 6 months just to help them get to the next step. And there was something that just really catalyzed there, which is if ever I'm asked for advice, I would give a founder is, who is your co-founder? Who is in the trench with you? Because entrepreneurship is lonely. Doesn't matter how many people are around you, the responsibility, the single-mindedness that's required, it is lonely. Mm-hmm. It is hard by yourself. And sometimes it's, some people have the support net where it's a spouse, it's a family member. But for a lot of young entrepreneurs who aren't in that stage of life yet, like building a business with someone is much easier than building it by yourself. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, something Doc said there, which just really just linked back to that piece there. It's being there by yourself. And when the results don't come as quickly as you want, or they don't come in the way that you expected them, which is what the journey of entrepreneurship is all about, it is so hard to push through when you're by yourself. And it's just often just someone who's in the trench that you can speak to who actually feels it. So often people outside, you can speak to them, you can speak to your spouse, you can speak to friends, you can speak to a mentor, and they can give you good advice, but they're not in the trench, they're feeling it with you.
And I think Sakeni also made a point earlier to say they expect you to have all the answers anyway.
Yes.
So going to them for advice might be pointless because they're just looking to you for all the solutions.
So I mean, my story is very similar. Many years ago, I started out by lecturing at the University of Johannesburg many years ago, 25 years ago, and then joined Investec. And I was here for nearly 12, 13 years and decided that I wanted to see what it was like outside of a corporate. I'd invested in startups. I'd been involved in them from a very passive standpoint. Decided I want to go see what this is all about. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I planned very badly. We were speaking earlier about A-type personalities. Typically, I plan, I think these things through. This I didn't, and I effectively went out and I'll see what comes. Maybe I'll start my own business. Maybe I'll partner with people. Maybe I'll co-found something together. And, was into that journey where after, 12, 18 months and you're doing a couple of things, but nothing's really stuck yet. Like nothing's, you're not getting the kind of momentum that you wanted. It's just not going quick enough. And I think that's always the issue. It just doesn't go quick enough. And you do get to that point where you think, geez, where's my purpose? Because often we associate purpose with an element of traction. Like if you're putting an input and you're not getting an output, well then, I may have a purpose, but it's not really playing out the way I wanted it to. And that is a very lonely space. I go back to that lonely piece because you can be surrounded by people, you can be involved with a whole lot of people in the business or outside of the business, but it's really lonely being an entrepreneur. And that's where I think that, whatever that is, that support person or support net is so critical. So it could be a mentor, it could be a co-founder, it could be a spouse, whatever it may be. But I think everybody goes through that. We spoke earlier about, knocking on the doors and just, how many no's can you hear before
throwing in the towel, finally.
You just get fatigue and you think, hold on a minute, this is just too hard. And I think that ties into, we're talking here about mental health and wellness, and I think that's really where the sort of rubber starts hitting the road in terms of some of the impact that, being in that kind of situation, what that can do for you, especially again, if you don't necessarily have the support net around you, because it's quite hard to actually be self-reflective in that kind of environment. To build a business, you've got to be single-minded. Like it becomes, I said earlier, like it becomes all-encompassing. Your whole life has to become about that business. Like, balance becomes something for 5 years' time when you've made it, when you've done it, when you just got to get the next 6 months and the next 6 months. And, and I think that's where it's very hard to self-reflect and say, hold on a minute, like I could be doing damage here. Like I could be, I could be in trouble. And if you don't have that support net, I think it is quite hard to identify that and to, and obviously to work through that. So,
but I think that's invaluable advice about getting that level of support, find a co-finder. And, you mentioned there, particularly for young entrepreneurs, I would even say it's young and old. Young and old, if you're feeling you're very alone on this journey, find someone who's going to go along this journey with you. Kenny, I wanted to ask you spoke about the difficulties, the challenges, but I want to hear about the successes, but particularly with regards to your mental wellness and how you managed to cope with the stress, with the anxiety. I'm sure there were some moments where you fell into the pits of depression. How did you pull yourself out and what tools did you use just to keep going?
So I would say you definitely, I've had a few of those moments. Just take one in particular during COVID. I think that was by far one of the toughest, periods for any entrepreneur. I think when we had started the Siyafunda digital libraries, we had these networks in schools and we were growing and we were building clients. We were in 4 provinces at the time. And everything was going well. We had clients that we were building up and doing a few pilots with a few clients. And then suddenly COVID happens and then schools got closed and then nobody's at schools. We've got all this infrastructure sitting in schools and nobody there. And obviously around the time, pretty much every company started to pull it back their resources. And so within that one space, you're basically sitting and you're seeing everything sort of collapse around you.
Sure.
And to be honest, at that time, it feels like you are the biggest failure and it feels like you are letting everyone around you down. And the more you push, the more you fight, the more aggressive you try to get, but you end up agitating people. And I think for me, that's one of the key things that I've learned is that yes, when you're going into entrepreneurship, you're taking on this lifestyle of always fighting. You're a warrior, but also know when to stop and heal and regroup. And a lot of time, I think that was the hardest thing for me, because it felt like when you stop to rest, you are somehow giving up. And what I realized is that it becomes very important for you to give yourself space and time to feel what you need to feel. And that's going to be happening across. Whether the client that you were really counting on you're just about to close the deal and then something suddenly happens that just collapses everything. Instead of saying, okay, we got to keep moving on to the next one, take the time to stop and just reflect and feel what you need to feel. Sleep for the whole day in your shorts or whatever, because you're human, and allow yourself time to heal. And then after that, once you feel you're ready, you can go back at it again. And I think relying on people, I think as Darren said, it's not only going to always be your co-founder. You find angels somewhere. People always pop up. And I guess that's the one thing that keeps you going.
Finding the angels.
Right? Just when you're ready and you're just like, okay, I'm done. Everybody is a mess and all of these things. There's always someone that pops up just out of nowhere. And literally when I've looked back at the pivotal moments in my career, there's been times when I was done. I was out. There was no way forward. There was no way back. And then somehow, someone just pops up, and is able to then help you sort of align. I remember back in 2014, we had put everything, getting the funding in terms of getting the company going. And it got to the point where we were just completely out of everything. And out of nowhere, I get a call from someone saying, hey, I like what you're doing. Let's meet. We literally got our first angel investment that same day. Literally, I had already packed out and ready to go home and basically was done. But something just came in the middle of nowhere and basically saved us. And I found that a lot of that has happened in my career. It becomes very easy to give up on humanity with the kind of thing you have to face. And so a lot of the time, what keeps you going is those relationships. Is you look internally, a lot of it is always the pressure, of course. But when there's people out there who are reinforcing, whether financially or not, or just constantly trying to introduce you to someone or constantly checking in, that gives you the energy that you need to be able to keep going. So I would say within those really tough, incredibly rough periods, I think look to not only the issues, but look also to the people who have stood by you, who have allowed whatever you're building to become bigger than yourselves. And a lot of the time, I think that's what ends up keeping you going. But there's something in you that just goes like, this is bigger than me. There are people who believe in this, who've put their faith in this. And so it's not up to me anymore. And that's usually what keeps you going. I think it's just about optimizing your luck. The more you work on towards something, at some point, regardless of whatever you're working on, you're going to get lucky. The question is, what are you going to get lucky on? And so a lot of what I've tried to do is to just always optimize that space, that if something does align, it needs to be able to change the trajectory of everything around me. And so I think it's a really tough space, but a lot of it is people. You're going to be inspired by people. You're also going to be frustrated by people. You're going to learn to trust people. You'll also be betrayed by people. And a lot of it is just going to be this roller coaster where you are not only developing the business, but you're developing yourself. You are growing yourself as a person. And therefore, as you grow, you're growing the ecosystem and the people around. And that is what makes this journey, I think, wonderful. Because I think once you've had a taste of that process of creating something out of nothing, it's fulfilling.
So I don't have any research to back this up. This is what I've experienced. But I think that there is an element, and it's not a South Africa thing. I think it's a global thing that there is, entrepreneurship has been glamorized over the last 10, 20 years. I mean, we've gone through a period where there's been massive global businesses that have been built out of garages, and they get glamorized, in the media that we're exposed to. And that's a good thing, because I think that, there are, in South Africa, I think there are a whole lot of people who are entrepreneurs, who need support, who need resources, etc. But there's a lot of people who are, not quite ready, or not necessarily, it's not for them to become entrepreneurs, but they're keen to be involved. And I'm seeing that more and more in sort of the colleagues at Investec, friends, communities, whatever it may be, people that are saying, look, I'm keen to get involved in supporting entrepreneurship in South Africa. How do I do that? I like what I do. I work in a really good company, so it's not for me to become an entrepreneur, but how do I get involved? Those are the kind of people that can become those angels. Those are the kind of people that have resources or skills or an element of expertise or time or whatever it is that can often make a difference. And obviously now matching up, these people that have got the interest and potentially the resources with the entrepreneurs. I think that's also something we need to think about, because otherwise it does come down to those lucky introductions, those lucky connections, the out of the blue phone call that comes from someone and, changes your whole world and the whole business. So that's, I think, also a very good thing. You asked for good stories. That's a good thing, I think.
Yes. Given all this talk, for me, 3 P's that I'd like to highlight. Where there's passion, where there's purpose, and processes happen and keep on happening, you are bound to bump into some luck and an angel investor. So for me, if I have somebody that I want to take up my wing, I have had opportunities where I've had to angel invest. As I said, as an entrepreneur, you learn that in the process, that if you do invest in somebody's business financially with your experiences and skills and all of that. So for me, if I find those 3 P's in any young person, old person, I'm willing to go all out. And I think what Darren and Sakani are also just highlighting is that if we can have all of those ingredients, then the support will come, the luck, some door will open, somebody will have faith in you.
I love that. And I love that we've ended on a positive note. And I think we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me here this afternoon. I think it's been daunting from what you were saying, but also a very inspiring discussion. Zakeni, Letabo and Darren, thank you very much for joining me today. We reimagine mental health in the context of entrepreneurship. And I think it's given us a lot of inspiration.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Entrepreneurship is crucial for any economy that is seeking to develop. It opens doors for innovation and provides employment and learning opportunities which contribute to economic growth. While the journey of a self-starter will always be arduous, an enabling environment must be provided to allow entrepreneurs to thrive. This brings us to the end of Season 1 of our Reimagine Mental Health series, brought to you by Investec Life, an authorized FSB and licensed insurer. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to Investec Focus Radio SA or wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, goodbye from me, Katie Catapodis, and the Investec Life team. The views expressed are those of the contributors at the time of publication and do not necessarily represent the views of the firm and should not be taken as advice or recommendations. Investec Bank Limited, an authorized financial service provider and registered credit provider. Investec Life Limited is a licensed life insurance company and an authorized financial services provider. T's and C's apply.